All right, so today we're going to talk about different types of paintbrushes. I'm going to talk about the 5 most popular brushes and the common brushes that I use. I'm going to start with one of the brushes I use the most, which is the flat brush. Now, there's like a few different brushes that fall into, in my opinion, the very similar category as the flat brush. So those are also called a wash brush or a bright brush. Now, your flat brush, and this one's actually called a flat wash brush. It's because some wash brushes can be different sizes, but the main difference between, like, say you have let's just say this is a classic flat brush right here, and then I have a wash brush. So you can see the difference. The wash has a little bit of a shorter bristles and like soft bristles. So they're like really flexible and soft. Whereas the flat brush is a little bit stiffer and the bristles are a little longer. And then you have your bright brush, which is basically like a flat brush, but with short bristles. So these are different sizes and stuff, but you can get an idea of the amount of bristles. Like this one's a bright brush, and then this one is a flat. So it's the bristles are just a little bit longer on the flat brush. So this is another flat brush right here. And again, the wash brush is the bristles are more flexible. So, but you're basically looking at these rectangle shaped or square shaped brushes. That's how they look. So when you're going to paint, this brush is my favorite for laying down backgrounds or doing thin lines or anything like that. So for example, if I wanted to do just a simple X stroke or laying down color, I really love using the flat or the wash brush. And I feel like they're pretty interchangeable. I actually prefer the wash brush sometimes just because the bristles are a little shorter. And so they can be a little easier to control. And it doesn't like flop around as much. Like this is a flat brush, so it's a little bit more stiffer and just the brush is longer. So it can be a little different to work with. But with these types of brushes, like when you work into your smaller paintbrushes, like a smaller flat, or a smaller bright brush, this one's like about a number 6. That's when you start to get into like, I can come in and I can make lines by just using the edge of the brush. Or you can just get a smaller area. Like say I want to make a tree trunk, I could just paint on a rectangle shape because that's what the brush is already shaped, and then use the edge of the brush to make a branch coming off. Like that. So it's very versatile when it comes to, like, if you get the big brush, that's like your color blocking, your big loose brush strokes. So much fun. Again, you can even use like a really big one like this, get your canvas covered really quickly. And then when you get into things like, I want to paint a tree or want to do this, you're using that smaller flat brush, but it still has so much versatility, which is why it's one of the brushes that I use the most. Okay, so when you're getting your paintbrushes, I do recommend the Princeton brand. Like this is a Princeton. This is, most of the ones that I have are Princeton because they're really economical. You can get the real value sets or like the snap Princeton brushes I like, and I'll link all those in the description. You can check out and maybe try out some of them. But I recommend having like a big one, maybe a 1 to 2 inch flat brush for backgrounds and stuff. And then having a medium or a smaller one, like around a 6 or so, number 6, just for these things like trees and all that. Okay. So my next favorite brush is going to be the round brush. So we already talked about the flat brush and some other very similar brushes to that. Now the round brush is one of my all-time favorites just because of how versatile it is. And you can get some fun techniques, and there's obviously so many sizes. So I'm going to show you some that I like to use, and I'll show you how they work a bit. And then you maybe will decide which ones you want to get that are going to work for the projects you're creating. Now, I love using these for leaves, flower petals. So really, if you're painting florals, you got to have some round brushes in there. I feel like you really... it's just so much easier. You can get a lot of one brush stroke stuff in there with that. So for example, if I wanted to paint a flower or a leaf petal or something like that, I would just notice how if I want a bigger flower, I would just use a bigger brush. And I'm just rolling the brush in there. So a lot of times when I'm loading up a round brush, I'll roll the brush a bit and then just barely touch the tip. And then you can just use the pressure push and then release slowly. And then you have a nice fun like petal or leaf shape. And you can just do different things. Like maybe I want some smaller ones. So I'm just barely touching the tip. Or maybe I want to create something more circular, like a spiral design. Round brushes are really great for anything circular. So I'm just showing you how you can create some fun shapes. And then obviously when you're doing something smaller, like say this is like the bigger brush, then I can come into a really small one. This is just a number 2, I believe. Let's see. This one's really small. Yeah, this is a 2 round. I usually don't work with a 1. I'll show you a 1. This is a 1. It's a little smaller than a 2, but I do feel like they get really frayed out really easily. I usually am using like a minimum of a 4 or a 3, but sometimes I'll bust out the little tiny ones. And you can just kind of pull in. Notice how even with the big round brush, I was able to get little details like this, but you can just barely touch and get some tiny little details. And then the smaller round brushes are great for like drawing lines. So say I wanted to draw a line that was wiggly. This is a little easier to get with the round brush, even though you can do lines with a flat brush. You can do lines with just the edge like I showed before. But for this one, if you want, like say you want a branch that's really wiggly or has more bent features to it, it's a lot easier to use a round brush to wiggle around. And again, like I'll do like any kind of spiral thing, or even just like signing my name, my signature, is easier to use a round brush. So when deciding your sizes, you just want to decide how big of a canvas you're working on. If you're working on small canvases, maybe those smaller brushes are going to be better for that detail work. But you're just looking at, are you doing a lot of curves and again, or florals with the leaves and the petals and things like that. Those are really key brushes to have for those types of paintings, or any kind of, maybe you're painting an animal or whatever. It's helpful to have those on hand. So hopefully this is helpful for the round brushes. Again, there's so many different sizes. Just choose the sizes that you know you're going to use for what you're creating and the size canvas you're working on, but you got to get some round brushes in there. All right, now my next brush that I use, maybe not as much as I use the flat and the round brushes, I use those the most. So usually I have a large flat brush and a medium flat brush and then a small round brush. That's what I'm typically working with in most of my tutorials. But there are times when I will throw in a Filbert. And I love using the Filbert because sometimes you can just get these really nice rounded edges or sometimes it's helpful for like blending or like clouds or things like that. So sometimes I'll bust out a Filbert for things like that. So for example, I can, get the Filbert. It's just like a flat brush, but with a rounded tip. So when you go in and paint, instead of getting that, hard kind of edge that you get with the flat brush. So let me just show you the difference between the two in the way the brush stroke looks. So see how we're just releasing. This one is so sharp edged and square at the tip, whereas my Filbert here is just this rounded top a little bit more. Now, again, this one's really great for petals. So or leaves or something, but usually more like rounded petals is that I would be using this for. See how I can make this fun flower shape. I just notice how it would look so different if you had that tip on the flower, that square tip. So a lot of times petals don't have square tips. So you're using those Filberts to help with getting those rounded tips. Or again, maybe I want to scrub. Sometimes I'll use the Filbert for some scrubbing techniques like galaxies or clouds or things like this. So see how I could scrub it, and it's just like that rounded tip can really create a little bit of a softer effect when you're doing those kinds of motions. Okay, and then you have the smaller brush. Maybe this is just a smaller filbert. So maybe you want to get some smaller flower shapes or some more detailed scrubbing or round effects. And you can really use it to make lines too. I mean, it's possible to just use the edge of the filbert like that and get some really nice lines. So it can be versatile. Like, for example, one thing I like painting with the filbert is like cactuses. So it just has like a much easier one brush stroke shape for creating a cactus. So see how I just made like a little cactus shape right there? So there you go. I mean, like you can think of lots of different things that are have similar shapes, and then just decide, do I need a filbert? Do I think I'll use it? Again, I don't use that one as much. Some people just love working with it because they love the shape, the result. And I do sometimes, depending, like if I did a desert landscape, I'd probably be using a filbert a lot. Or if I was doing maybe like a galaxy kind of thing, I would bust that out. But you know, it just depends on what you're painting and what you want your results to be. But I like having one handy just in case, and I do recommend having it. Again, this is one of my top 5 brushes, so it's still in there, and it's really fun to work with. Our next brush in my top 5 would be the fan brush. Now, again, I don't use this one as much as I use the flat and the round brushes, but I do like to play with this one from time to time because it does have some fun effects that just make achieving certain things a little easier. And sometimes you're just in the mood to play with a fan brush because, I mean, look at it, look how fun it looks. Okay, so I'm going to show you actually a couple different bristles too as we get into these different kinds of brushes. Now, this one is just a synthetic Teflon bristle. And as you can see, as I touch it, it's very soft and flexible. So you're going to get this much more washy kind of flowy kind of thing going on. So if I come in here with this, and you can see how you can create some fun texture with it. I actually really find it fun to do fur. Like if you're painting like a tiger or like something like that, or cat, like more up close where you want to get fur. Look how fun that is. So as you can see, the bristles tend to kind of separate like that. And then it creates almost like this bunch of tiny little brushes effect. So you know, again, I always tell people whatever you're painting is really, or your goals when you're painting is really going to dictate the brush you choose. But you could do other things with the fan brush, like Bob Ross style, you know, he would paint trees with it. So you can just use it on its edge and then you can kind of tap the brush to make trees and things like this. It's not my favorite to do. And if I were to use a fan brush, I would use for trees and stuff, I would probably use a thicker or stiff bristle brush. Now this, again, the synthetic brushes are usually soft. They're like the soft bristle brushes like this, where you have so much flexibility in your bristles. Whereas this is this is an actual Bob Ross brush, okay? We have the Bob Ross fan brush. It's just so much stiffer. So if you're gonna go in and would make like big trees with his fan brushes, and then you can kind of go in there and tap. Notice the difference. You get a little bit more stiffness as you're doing things like tapping or whatever. But notice how I could just tap across the whole thing like that with the brush, and it just so easily gives you a pine tree. So it's just one of the many things that you can do with a fan brush. You can do a lot of things, but again, you can get like fur, you can do some like blending effects. It's really a customizable thing, but you do want to do like, again, you could do grass. Grass is fun. So see, I could just flick it up like that. Or just dry brushing, like where you're just barely touching to get this type, like a waterfall maybe, you know, so many things. I can come up with a lot of ideas. Again, you can do these types of things with more than just this brush, but it is a brush that can be really beneficial for that. And then again, you're looking at the different stiffness of bristles too, especially in my opinion, when you get into like a brush like a fan brush, it's going to change the workability of the paintbrush so much. Like even with all of them, but you know, it's really going to make a difference in the result. So you're going to want to think about that when you choose the brush as well. So with that, I think that's all I'm going to say about the fan brush. Again, it's in my top 5, but it's not one that I use all the time, but it is fun for getting these results like grass or fur, or maybe you're tapping in trees, and you can get it done really fast with a brush like this. So if you want to save some time, you might want to throw a fan brush in your set of brushes just to have on hand for those types of things. All right, last but not least, we have an angle shader brush. So this type of brush is great for lines, getting into tight little curves and spots, and even like leaves and things like that, or even like a calligraphy type stuff. So I have a couple different sizes here just to show, and these are golden Teflon. These are synthetic brushes, but what I usually would just use this for is mostly just like lines, you know. So say I wanted to create some lines, maybe I'm creating like a big palm frond or something. But as you can see, as I'm sampling it a bit, you could see the like the calligraphy vibes here. So like if I were to write, like maybe you wanted to do some painting of letters or things like that, this would be a fun brush for that. But again, just like lines, leaves, like say I wanted to create a leaf, I could just push, you know, create these different shapes with this. And then if you wanted to get even a little more precise, you could be using this little one. Maybe you want to create like some little eyelashes, or again, like maybe like a palm tree. I would say like this kind of brush would be really fun for palm fronds or feathers or things like that, where you're getting these precise little motions, little angled shapes, little curved type. It's so fun to use because it's just already bent like in that perfect way that you need to have the brush to do those types of things. So again, you could use it for like little grass. You could use it for, you know, doing branches, anything like that. All right, and just as a little bonus talk about brushes, I again just want to go over the bristle type, because what I see a lot is that sometimes we're not sure what bristle type to use. And I would say that 90% of the time I'm using a synthetic soft bristle brush. So it's something that's like this, like a Teflon, like a white or gold Teflon type brush. It's soft, it's synthetic. But sometimes you want those stiff bristle brushes. Again, like I was showing you with the fan brush in the fan brush demonstration, it's going to give very different results having the bristle brush versus having the synthetic soft brush. So again, this would be like more of a bristle brush texture. And this is one brush that I would recommend. And this is just a 1-inch flat bristle brush, but it's so different than the synthetic. Like, so you can end up getting these types of tapping. So if you're doing like Bob Ross stuff, you want to have a stiff bristle brush for the tapping, just like this. So see, I can tap this. It looks so much, it's like so classic, but if I do it with the synthetic brush, I can do it. I just need to tap the brush down and distress it a little bit like this. Then you can get it in there. But it's so much, it takes so much longer. It's like you can barely get any ground covered. So if you have a big painting to do that's using that tapping Bob Ross motion, I do recommend having a bristle brush, which is different than the Teflon brush. So keep that in mind as you're selecting your brushes. But I hope this was helpful. Again, the top 5 brushes that I'm using is that flat brush. Then we have the round brush coming in at second. Those are the top 2. You definitely need to have some flat and round brushes, if the bare minimum. Then you might want to throw in a Filbert or a fan brush or an angle brush. So those would be the other top brushes that I would grab first. So I hope that was helpful for you to decide which brushes you might want to invest in. There are so many different brushes you have, and I hope to paint with you soon. Let me know if there's any other questions you have about supplies or materials. I get supply questions a lot, and talking about brushes is fun because, I mean, it really does make a difference in the result of what you're creating, the brush you have. So you would make sure to get some decent brushes. Again, I will link some that are my favorites that I use the most, and they're not going to break the bank. All right, have a beautiful rest of your day. Thanks for watching.